This happened 4 years ago. I'm a girl, and at the time this happened, I was 12 going on 13 in just a month or two. The friend I mention in this story was 14 at the time. The friend, Sally, who I was staying with that night, was quite a bit older than me. At least at the time, the 2-year age gap was quite big. At 12 or 13 years old, I was about to start my second year of middle school, whereas Sally should have been about to begin her sophomore year at high school. I met her in the beginning of my first year at a new school. She was older than the other kids in our grade and was considered one of the popular kids, and I think that was what drew me to her at first. We became friends fast, and before we knew it, we were spending every single weekend together. Seriously, every single weekend. Nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. It was your typical Friday night. We carpooled to her family's apartment after school. Now, I've always been a picky eater, so when her family had dinner, I didn't eat with them. I just snacked on the Pop-Tart that I'd stowed away in my backpack, in case they ordered something I wouldn't eat. Something to note is that her family was pretty religious. I wouldn't go as far to say they were fanatics, but they didn't allow their kids to watch horror movies or anything that was rated PG-13 or older. It didn't stem from the desire to protect them from something inappropriate. Sally's mother had an irrational fear that scary movies had satanic messages. We asked to watch The Purge, and her mum obviously said no, but after some negotiating, she agreed to let us watch The Hunger Games instead. After the movie, Sally and I went to hang out in her room. She put on some music, and being the age we were, we gave each other makeovers. By the end of it, we were looking much older than just 12 and 14, and this part of the night is when things started to seem off to me. Now, Sally wasn't the most positive influence, despite being my best friend at the time. She was manipulative and got off on putting me down, and she had a habit of talking to men online and lying about her age. Sally showed me some texts between her and the man she was talking to. I can't give you an exact recount of them, but they consisted of him trying to convince her to meet up with him, and just the usual things you'd expect from a creep online. According to him, he was 19, tall, and blonde with soulful blue eyes. Once I'd seen the texts, I asked if she had a picture of him, as something didn't sit right with me after seeing the messages. She showed me what he looked like, and he was very clearly not 19. This man was at least 40, and looked like he'd lived in his mother's basement. Suddenly, she got a call from him. Sally answered without hesitation, and when I heard the voice on the other end of the call, I felt like I was going to be sick. "You're so pretty. Why don't you come meet me?" he asked. Sally said that she couldn't because she was spending the night with a friend. The mention of that sparked his interest, then he proceeded to try and ask us both to meet him. Sally, lacking any common sense, said yes, and thus begun her plan for us to sneak out and walk 15 blocks to meet him in a deserted McDonald's parking lot. I didn't want to go. I was raised on stories of what happens to teen girls who meet random men from the internet in person. But after adamant pleading from Sally that she didn't feel safe going by herself, I agreed. We took our phones with us for the walk, and I had a kitchen knife stuffed in my bra in case something were to happen and I needed to defend myself. The route we had to take to get there didn't have very many street lamps, and there weren't any houses. We were surrounded by trees on both sides of us. When we got to the parking lot, the only car parked nearby was a black, beat-up 2000 Toyota Corolla. The car was still running when we got there, and from what we could tell, there was more than just one person inside. The man from the picture got out of the front passenger seat and left the door open behind him before approaching us. I turned my flashlight on so I could see, and he was obviously on something. I can't tell you what kind of drug it was, but his eyes were so wide they looked like they were about to pop out of his head. He was jittery and kept twitching. I became very conscious of how big he was, maybe 6'2" and around 280 pounds. For reference, my friend and I did not look our ages, even without makeup. I'm about 5'2", but my friend was pretty tall, probably around 5'6", 5'7", so we were both significantly smaller than him. The man reached out for us and caught my friend by the arm. I went to get my knife as quickly as I could, and that's when I saw his friends getting out of the car. He invited us back to his car and offered us booze and drugs, but after seeing my knife and that I was ready to call the police, he released my friend. I took Sally's arm and ran faster than I ever had in my entire life, and we took the long way home to avoid them finding out where she lived in case they were following us. And once we got there, her family still sound asleep. We locked all the doors, closed the blinds, and blocked him on everything. There wouldn't be any sleeping that night. We were constantly peeking out the window, and to our dismay, that same Toyota was circling around her apartment building. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. I never mentioned any of this to my parents, out of fear of getting grounded or in trouble. I'm 16 now, and they still have no clue. I still get nervous when I see a car similar to the one from that night. And as for Sally, her parents never found out either. We agreed to never speak about it again, and thankfully she moved into a new house just a few weeks after the incident. Safe to say Sally and I haven't spoken in 3 years, as she was pissed at me for ruining her night, and our friendship didn't last for long after that. We had a pretty bad falling out, but looking back on it now, it was definitely for the better. So Sally, thank you for teaching me a very valuable lesson and making me realize that some people are best just left alone. I've only recently discovered this thread, and while my story is certainly not as freaky as some of the ones I've come across so far, it left me scared to leave the house for months. This happened about 8 years ago. I was living in a really nice suburb in London back then, on a private road. There were plenty of mansions around and people driving expensive cars. Think Maserati and Porsche. Our block of flats by comparison looked pretty normal. Nothing fancy anyway. The neighbours were pleasant enough, though we hardly ever bumped into anyone, as it was a really quiet road. I never saw any children playing outside, let alone people pushing prams around. In hindsight, it was almost eerie how quiet it all was. My husband and I, newly married, early 20s, lived on the 2nd floor, 3rd floor in the US, I think. Our flat had beautiful big windows that overlooked the back gardens, which almost resembled a private landscape garden or a park, although it was a communal space. It was a Saturday, and my husband had an appointment in the city. We had arranged to meet up later that afternoon to watch a musical together, and I spent the morning pottering around and getting lunch ready. The strange thing is, I felt really weird that day. The moment my husband walked out of the door, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. I thought I was being paranoid and kept glancing out of the windows. And let me just reiterate how big they were, almost floor-to-ceiling size. I brushed it off thinking I was imagining things. We had lived there for 2 years, and although I had one scary encounter on that road before, watching a group of youngsters trying to break into a house, I felt safe overall. Still, that bad feeling put me on edge. All morning, paranoid me thought there was someone in the garden, hiding behind some shrubs, watching me. I knew I was irrational, but I usually trust my gut instincts, and kept staring out of the window in the living room, when I saw something. Shoes. They were kind of poking out like someone was crouching down between the bushes. At first I thought someone had left a pair of shoes out there, strange as it seemed. But when I looked again a few minutes later, the shoes were gone. That wasn't enough to freak me out, but I decided to head into the city earlier as planned, as I couldn't stand being in the flat anymore and just wanted to get out. Maybe go to the museum, or do some shopping before meeting up with my husband. I decided to walk to the station, which was a 20-minute walk from the flat, leading through a wood. I grabbed my bag and headed out. But the moment I stepped out of the house, that bad feeling intensified. I kept looking behind my shoulders, and after maybe 1 minute of fast-paced walking, I noticed a weird guy behind me. I had no idea where he'd come from. It was almost like he had leapt out of the bushes or something, and he struck me as weird because of his walk. I don't know how to describe it, but he didn't walk like the average person. Instead of walking on his heels, he walked on his toes, if that makes sense. It almost looked like he was skipping, and every time I turned my head around, he had come closer. Mind you, I'm a brisk walker, and I'm a runner, so I wasn't slow or anything, and yet this guy was catching up with me in no time. Again, paranoid me tried to ignore my bad feeling. Sure, this guy's weird psycho walk freaked me out, but other than that he looked normal and was even wearing a suit. Overall he looked smart, like a city worker, and I just kept walking through that wooden part of the suburb. There weren't any cars or people around, as I had taken a shortcut through the forest before joining a busier road that led to the station, and all the time that guy was behind me, now keeping a friendly distance. Once I turned around and saw he had his eyes fixed on me. The moment we locked eyes, a cold shiver ran down my spine. There was something about his look. It wasn't menacing, but so intense and fixated on me. I felt like he was hunting me, and I know that sounds like an exaggeration, but it's how it made me feel. Like prey. I picked up my pace, and so did he. I listened to his footsteps coming closer and felt his eyes on my back. I took another shortcut, trying to get rid of him, but he kept following me. Once I'd reached the busier road again, I felt a sense of relief. At least there were cars around, so even if he tried to drag me into a bush, there would be some witnesses. At that point I avoided looking behind me, sensing his pleasure in watching me act like an erratic idiot storming down that road, trying to get away from him. But I had to cross the road at a traffic light and came to a halt. Before I knew it, he was standing next to me, staring at me. I can still smell his cologne. He mumbled something under his breath, something obscene, I was sure. But I decisively looked the other way and pretended not to take notice, even as he inched closer. The moment the traffic light changed, I sprinted across the road and saw him get on a bus. Man, did I feel relieved then. I'm such a stupid moron, I thought. That guy wasn't after me at all. Bear in mind it was the middle of the day as well. Least to say I felt very silly. For 3 minutes, maybe. Guess what? The guy had got on the bus, passed me on that bus, and must have got off at the next stop, because he was there, waiting for me. I saw him watch me as I approached, his unnerving smirk, the way he gaped at me. And that's when I knew he was playing cat and mouse with me. Frankly, I had no idea what crazy crap was going on in his head. At that point, I almost lost it. My heart was beating so fast, all that adrenaline and the same thought going round in my head. What the hell did he want from me? Unfortunately, I had to walk past him, and the moment I did, I heard him whisper, "You should keep your blinds shut." That's when it hit me. That bad feeling. I hadn't imagined it. This guy had been watching me at home, and I inevitably glanced at his shoes. They were shiny and black, like the ones I had spotted in the garden. At that point I was less than 5 minutes away from the station, and I decided to leg it, sprinting down the hill that led to the station. I heard him behind me and saw that he had started running after me. Frankly, I thought this guy was a psycho, and I was expecting him to pull a knife from his pocket or shove me into the road in front of a bus or a car. I ran, and I knew he could easily have overtaken me, as I was wearing heels and couldn't exactly run that fast in them. But he stayed behind me, as if he was teasing me. The moment I got to the station, I ran to my platform and jumped onto the train, praying this guy would not get on. Luckily for me, he didn't. And as the train pulled out, I saw him standing on the opposite platform, waving at my train, maybe knowing I was in there, watching him. The scary thing is that it's not the last time I saw those shoes in the garden. We moved a few months later, and I'm glad to say the shoes didn't follow me. To this day, though, I wonder what his intentions were. I never left the house on my own after that, and never saw him again. So this happened probably around 10 or 11 years ago, when I was 15 or 16 years old. For a little backstory, the legal drinking age in my country is 18, so if you want alcohol and didn't have a fake ID or a parent to get it for you, then you had to wait around outside the off-license, liquor store for the Americans, until someone came by who agreed to go in and purchase the alcohol for you. So we waited around, and eventually found someone who was willing to go in and get it for us. We asked him to buy a few bottles of vodka for me and a few friends, 2 of which I was with, and the others were meeting after we'd done this. Now, as it was around 6 p.m, we decided it was too much of a risk to decant our vodka into less suspicious-looking bottles in the middle of the street, as it was very busy. So we did what we would usually do in this situation. We found a nearby food place, and quickly ran in to use the bathroom to decant our alcohol, so we could be on our way. This time we chose to do this in a nearby McDonald's that we'd done it in before, so we knew it was a safe bet. We went into McDonald's and head straight for the bathroom, as we'd done a million times before. As we get into the bathroom, me and my other 2 friends, we'll call them Harriet and Cara, all occupy one cubicle to get the job done, get out, and get back to our drinking ASAP. As I'd previously mentioned, we had done this many times before, and usually opted to come into this particular McDonald's, as it was usually busy, which meant no one paid attention to 3 teenagers running straight into the toilet without purchasing anything. As we're all in there doing our thing, I could suddenly hear a lot of shifting and moving around above us. I figured it was possibly the air conditioning and opted not to tell my friends, as I thought it would freak them out. But as we're about to leave the cubicle, we all suddenly hear a giggle and a "Where are you girls off to?" I looked up and see the forehead and eyes of a male who looked to be about 30, just staring out of from underneath a tile in the ceiling that he'd lifted slightly. We stood there in complete shock, staring at this guy who proceeded to giggle down at us and ask our names, where we were going, and if he could come too. Be honest now. Who really expects there to be some random guy in the ceiling of a McDonald's toilet? Being a teenager who thought I was untouchable, I proceeded to tell the guy that he was a perv and to go away, or words to that effect. But the guy seemed to enjoy this and giggled a little more, still shifting around in the ceiling and never taking his eyes off us. Now I should probably mention that along with pouring our drink into the other bottles, we'd pre-rolled a few joints too, so we were terrified to alert anyone at this point, as we were young and scared of our parents finding out. The guy, still staring at us, proceeded to ask questions like what age we were, where we lived, and could he have some of our drink and a smoke of our weed. Still all the while twitching and fidgeting overhead, he then started to lift the tile, and as we're all stuck in a cubicle with this guy above us, we knew the only way for him to get down was to come directly on top of us, so we noped out at that point pretty quickly. We went outside and discussed what we were going to do, and I decided to go back in and alert someone, as it's a very busy McDonald's, and I knew there would be women and children in and out of the toilet until closing time. I didn't want to risk that creep staying up there just to spy on them, especially since I knew he was there and had witnessed his behaviour firsthand. So I go in and tell a member of staff that I'd been in the toilet for a long while, taking a phone call. Terrible lie, but my 15-16-year-old brain was too scared to tell the truth in case they alerted the police, and that's when the guy appeared. And to my shock, they were completely unsurprised. They were just pissed off more than anything. I saw a few male members of staff enter the toilet, so I figured they could handle it from there, and I went on my way. We still went into that McDonald's, but never had any encounters with the ceiling guy again. We're not even sure if he was caught, as we didn't hear anything about it afterwards. So to the creepy guy in the ceiling watching the girls' bathroom with a bird's eye view, let's not ever ever meet again. I'll start off by explaining the area so you can get a good picture of where this occurred. We lived in a small neighbourhood. All of the surrounding streets were dead-end into a half-circle park, and behind the park are some woods and a railroad track. When we were younger, we all played in the front part of the woods, and we never ventured in too deep. This was our play area for years, and we never had an issue or scare. This area was pretty and well lit, so one day my brother Jimmy, my best friend Sarah, and my brother's best friend Ian were all building a dam in the middle of the small creek that ran through the park and the woods. The boys decided they were going to head back to Ian's house for some snacks, and Sarah and I would stay and finish our camp area. As we were moving rocks around, I get a very odd feeling come over me, a strange feeling that we were being watched. I immediately think it's the boys trying to scare us, and just continue with what we were doing. Sarah and I load up some big rocks and head back to the creek and put them down at the dam. I get that feeling again, and as I stand up, I see something straight in front of me, about 30 feet away. I can't clearly make out what it is yet, because it is behind a bush, but I see that it is a pattern of red and blue. I know that's nothing the boys had on, so at this point I am really focusing, trying to figure out what it is. As I'm scanning up the bush, I start to realize that it's a clown. My heart started pounding immediately as the clown and my eyes lock. He's wearing a blue-red hat with a reverse pattern red-blue jumpsuit. I grab Sarah's shirt and immediately pull her upright, and she noticed the man right away. He is smiling with a full face of makeup and has a huge knife. We both say nothing and start running as fast as our legs can take us, and he begins to follow. We can hear twigs snapping and ground crunching, but we are booking it and not looking back. We run through the front of the woods, through the side of the park, and up her dead-end street. Ian and Jimmy are 2 houses up from the end and see us running and are screaming, asking us what is going on. Whilst running past, we scream out that there's a clown, and they start laughing. Still screaming, we finally make it to the middle of the street where Sarah's dad, Danny, is now running out the front door because he hears us screaming. We meet Danny right at the beginning of the neighbour's house, and we are trying to explain what we had just seen, and he says, "Girls, stop it now, this is ridiculous. What are you talking about?" We try to catch our breath, and by this time Jimmy and Ian have caught up to us. We are crying, pointing, and telling Danny again that we'd seen a clown with a knife. Jimmy and Ian are laughing, and Danny is asking if they'd played a prank on us. About this time, an old yellow Pinto type of car comes from the dead end at the park and pulls right up next to the sidewalk of the yard we were in. And sure enough, plain as day, it was the clown. No hat this time, but still with a knife in hand and telling us to come over. Danny started shoving us all towards the house, and he himself is now scared and running away. The car drives off down the street. We get inside, and Danny calls the police. We had to give statements, and police patrolled the neighbourhood and the park for a few weeks. We were never allowed to go in the park again after that, and a few months later, the city started to clear out the woods, cutting down many trees and making a walking area that you could see through all the way to the train tracks. My friend and I used to talk about this many times up until her death. No one would believe us, had they not seen it as well. It was just so scary. I think they only got to see him because whoever it was had to go down the dead-end street to leave the neighbourhood. Either way, this man was not afraid of us, nor the small group of people that had gathered from our screaming. He very bravely stopped right in front of us as her father tried to comfort us and calm us down, all the while flashing his knife. We are lucky to be alive, I feel. Had it just been one of us left in the woods, which sometimes occurred, I don't think there would have been a group of 4 of us any longer. Sarah's dad stopped drinking that day. We all have fear of clowns. This story takes place around 2009, and I had just moved to South Carolina from the PNW region. A little bit of backstory. I had just turned 21, was working a full-time job in the medical field, and had absolutely no friends since I was new to the area. One night I got bored and decided I was going to put myself out there. I drove from my tiny town to Columbia, South Carolina. It's about a 40-minute drive, but I knew that that's where all the good clubs and bars were. I was specifically looking for gay-friendly spots, and found myself downtown looking for a club that was no longer there, though the internet said it was. Disappointed, I talked with this lady outside a club across the street. She told me about Chill. It was a laid-back bar with karaoke in the West Columbia area. Sounds great, I thought. She gave me directions, and so I headed that way. I passed by a gas station on my way to buy a soda and asked the lady behind the counter if she knew whether or not I was in the right area. It appeared I was, so I drove about 5 or 6 blocks until I made it there. Now, I'm not the life of the party, and I'm somewhat introverted, so I was quite nervous the whole time I was there. I talked with a couple for a bit that was from the area, ordered a margarita, and smoked my cigarettes watching a Katy Perry drag show. Then I noticed this man walk in. About 5'9", roughly 200 pounds, dark skin, goatee, wearing a white hoodie, jeans, and a red hat. He sat next to me and winked. He ordered his drinks, then asked me for a cigarette. Sure, I said. I asked him how he was doing, and if he was from around the area. His answers were short, and I was feeling kind of awkward at this point, so I just took it as he was not too interested. I turned my stool and continued watching the drag show. This is when the vibe completely changes. I then felt his warm breath in my ear, whispering, "Meet me out back by my car." And with that, he got up and left. Now, I wasn't very sexually experienced at that point in my life, and I'm certainly not going to blow some stranger in his car in the parking lot. He didn't even have much to say in the first place. I stayed for about 20 minutes more. It seemed like there wasn't much of anyone else there my age, and I didn't seem to be making headway as everyone there seemed to be with someone and I was alone. So I figured that was about as much of a night out as I was going to get, so I decided to leave. As I was leaving the bar and entering my car, I saw headlights flash from behind me. A figure arose from the car, and I see that it's that guy. He threw his arms up and started running towards me. I didn't mess around and put my 1992 Corolla in drive and got the hell out of there. I remember all the lights were green, which I thought was great, seeing as I was able to get away from that area fast, but I realized quickly that he's right behind me. He continues to follow me as I come up upon the gas station that I was at earlier in the night. I see a cop car parked outside of it, so I pulled in and parked up. Of course, dude at the bar did too. He actually parked right beside me. I got out and went inside to tell the police officer that this guy was following me from the bar, and I was feeling uneasy. He went outside and found the guy, who was quickly pulling out of the station parking lot. The cop waved him down as a police backup car pulls into the gas station, and they walk over to get a statement. Turned out the guy had an expired license and a warrant out for his arrest, and when they frisked him, he had a hunting knife on him. I remember the disturbing look he gave me as they cuffed him. I couldn't believe it. I left and I was completely lost, again. This time I'm distraught, so it took me forever to get home. Had I got in the car with him, who knows what could have happened. The first job I had was at a pizza place in my hometown. It's a really small town with a little over 1,000 people. We're right next to a main highway that's about 30 minutes away from a major city, and one night around September-October time, I was working with 2 other co-workers and our manager. Our whole shift had been pretty slow, and we were getting ready to close at 9 p.m. At around 8:30, 2 men and a little girl, around the age of 7 or 8, walked through the door. I went up to the front and asked them if they needed help with anything or if they're going to place an order. One of the men, the shorter one, said that they are just passing through, then asked about the prices of different items on the menu. He also asked what time we closed. I give him the answer and he just said, "Okay," and walked away to sit down with the little girl at a booth. The taller man then left the building and got into their car that was parked out front. The smaller man then got up after about 5 minutes, whispered something to the little girl, and then leaves. My co-workers and I are watching this all going on, and are talking about how strange it all is. The little girl then got up and started dancing around to the radio that we had playing. After a couple of minutes of this, I walked up to her and asked her if she was hungry or if she wanted a drink of anything. She said she only wanted a water, which I got for her. Then she took it back to the booth and sat down. I asked her who she was waiting for, and she said her dad. My co-workers and I are starting to get worried for her, because the 2 men haven't come back yet, and it's 8:50 p.m. We started to think that neither one of them was her dad at all, so my manager decided to call the police. Now our town is too small for our own police station, so we have to wait for them to come from the next town over, which takes at least 15 minutes. When I sat with the little girl at the booth, making small talk, trying to make sure she's safe and nothing happens before the cops get there, but in the middle of our conversation, she gets up and says she has to leave. My manager and I tried to tell her that she needs to stay in the restaurant until her dad comes back, but then she started crying and screaming and insists on us letting her go. A couple of days later, my manager said the cops found her walking down the road alone later that night. We never heard any more information about the situation afterwards, but I just hope she's safe now. I currently go to a large university in Philadelphia, and my school isn't in the greatest part of the city. I'm a senior now, and I've sort of learned to just keep my head down, and most of the people in the area will leave me alone. The one exception that I've had to this was my freshman year. My roommate freshman year was an absolute madwoman, stealing my stuff, threatening to physically assault me, and spreading rumors about me. I generally tried to stay out of my room for the most part, just to avoid any interaction with her, until I was able to get a new roommate that next semester. As a result, I spent a lot of my time at the library or at other friends' places. A few weeks into my first semester, I think it was around early October, I was hanging out at a friend's place. He lived on the other side of campus, probably a 15-minute walk from my dorm room, but my path from my room to his dorm never left campus. I had been warned prior to moving into my dorm room that campus was the safest place for students because the locals generally stayed off there unless they were grabbing food from a food truck. Keeping that in mind, I really didn't mind walking back from my friend's dorm room late at night, since the path was well lit and the only people I saw were other students. Regardless, it was getting late, and it was a weeknight, so I told my friend that I was going to head out. He offered to walk me home, but I declined, saying I would be fine, which was my first mistake. The walk back was perfectly fine, up until I got to the block that my dorm building was on. For context, there was another empty dorm building on the block that I lived on. It was scheduled to be torn down later that year because there was black mold everywhere inside. But at the time it was still standing, and there were absolutely no lights outside of it. There was a courtyard behind the building, which I used as a shortcut, which was my second mistake. As I entered the courtyard, I used my phone as a flashlight to kind of guide my way through the space. As I was nearing the other end of it, I heard someone called out, "Miss." Obviously my first thought was, nope, and just kept walking, pretending I didn't hear anything, and picked up my pace. But the voice called again, "Wait, miss." At this point I was nearly out to the courtyard, and there was some light coming from the windows of my dorm building, so I could kind of see what was going on without completely relying on my flashlight. I turned around to see who had been calling out to me, which was my third mistake, and was met with a man. He looked so ordinary, except for his oddly wide smile and the fact that he was carrying a rather heavy-looking trash bag. "Hey, miss, I have something for you." Nah, I think I'm okay. I need to be getting home." "No, I think you need this. Let me show you." He opened the trash bag and reached his hand in. I didn't know what to expect, so I bolted. I ran further from the courtyard and towards the ramp that led up to my building, thinking I could outrun him, but I was sorely mistaken. Despite the fact that there was about 10 to 15 feet between us, as soon as I turned, his hand was around my wrist. "Miss, I have something for you. I really think you need it." Feeling trapped and unsure what to do, I sighed, defeated. I hoped to God that someone would look out of their window and see what was going on, or someone else would be walking back to the building at a late hour and see us. I wanted to scream, but I was scared that if I drew attention to us, that he would do something that would make me really regret trying to get help. Again, not the greatest part of the city. He smiled at me, like he knew I wasn't going to try and call out, and let go of my wrist. I didn't realize how tightly he was gripping me until he released it. He took a step back from me and reached back into the trash bag again. My heart was pounding and I wasn't sure what to expect, but it definitely wasn't what he pulled out of the bag. It was a clock, an old digital alarm clock. The thing had to be at least 20 years old, and it was encrusted with dirt, like he'd pulled it out of a junkyard. I was stunned at the sight of the yellow and orange plastic. After I realized that he was actually trying to give me the clock, I thought it might have been a bomb. "Here, this is just for you." "Oh, I really don't need one. I have a clock up in my room," I said, gesturing towards the massive building behind us. "This one's different." "What the hell? What's that supposed to mean?" "Ah, miss, see, this one has a radio. Pretty unique, don't you think?" "I bet yours doesn't have a radio function," he smiled. "I mean, mine didn't, but don't most alarm clocks have radios built into them?" I took a step back from him, but as I stepped back, he stepped closer, mirroring my movement. He reached out, presenting the clock to me. I took another step back. He took another one forward. I knew my back was literally going to be against the wall of the dorm building if I took another 2 steps, and wasn't sure where to go. I felt like I had no choice but to go against everything my body was telling me, and accept the clock. I reached out and noticed that where he had grabbed my arm was already bruising. With my hand now outstretched, he placed the clock in my hand. I felt so dirty having it in my hand, I don't know how to describe it, but I had instantly felt like I had just finished rolling around in the dirt. My arm felt like it was throbbing, and the clock was so heavy. It felt like it was getting heavier with every passing second. I knew it just felt like that because I was freaking out, but it didn't make the experience any less terrifying. I didn't know what to do. The guy was still smiling at me. I blurted out thanks and spun around, gripping the clock. I took a step away from him towards the ramp leading up to my building, and he took a step back. I decided that this was my chance to bolt for the door. I spun around on my heels, took another few steps before hearing, "You're so beautiful, I love you," called out behind me. I turned back and the man was out of sight. I screamed. I didn't know what I'd just got myself into, but I didn't want to be any part of it. I sprinted towards the door to the building, dumping the clock in the trash can outside on the way. I still thought that there was a decent chance that it was a bomb, and if it was going to explode, I wanted it to do so in a contained space. Nothing came of the man, or the clock, other than the bruise on my arm. It healed completely within a few days, and soon after that I had sort of forgotten about the incident. I think I just repressed the memories and didn't want to unpack what I went through. I still try not to think about it, and the only reason I'm writing this now is because one of my current, not crazy roommates had brought it up a few days ago, and the floodgates of my brain opened, and I felt like I needed to share what happened. This story takes place way back when I was around 20 years old. I had been wanting to get into acting for some time and finally decided to just go for it. I auditioned for a local small college town theatre that was putting on that year's Halloween play, which was Dracula. I ended up getting the lead role, which I pat myself on the back for. It was my first ever audition, and they wanted to go with a younger Dracula as opposed to an older version. Funnily enough, my theatre teacher at school got the role of Van Helsing, so I felt more comfortable knowing one of the actors. Him and another actor who we had done a few plays with were nice enough to make me part of their little clique, since I was the outsider in the cast. Local theatre is usually all the same, people doing plays when they can, and it's a tight-knit group. After our first night of rehearsal, my teacher and his buddy, who was playing Lucy's dad in the play, invited me to the bar across the street, as was their tradition. So I joined them for a couple of drinks, and we talked shop and put the world to rights, as it were. The buddy was big into hauntings, so he asked me if I had any knowledge of the playhouse that we were acting in. I, of course, said no, and he and my professor looked at each other in a "should we tell him" manner. My professor gave a "sure, go ahead" point in my direction, and they went on to tell me that the building way back in the day was once a movie theatre. As the story goes, a young woman, about my age, was blown off by her boyfriend one night, so her and her friends decided to catch a movie. She caught her boyfriend at the movies, and was so upset that she ended up falling down some stairs at the theatre whilst running away, and accidentally killed herself. They told me that the young woman liked to occasionally haunt the dressing room area downstairs, and although they've never experienced anything, they heard that every once in a while she gets a crush on an actor, and she will move his clothes around. But I didn't buy into any of it. I knew a good haze when I heard one, so I naturally assumed that they were setting me up. A few weeks went by and I had to start dress rehearsals before anyone else, because I have to learn cape movements and stupid stuff like that. So I went downstairs and changed into my costume. Being on my own and being the near freak I am, I folded my normal clothes up and set them on a chair. We did the rehearsal, then I went to change back into my normal clothes. But when I got to the dressing room, my clothes were strewn about all over the place. I thought nothing of this. I just assumed it's just the guys playing a prank on me. I met them shortly after at the bar and said absolutely nothing about it, because I didn't want to feed into it and assume they'll ask and bait me into saying what happened. But nothing. We hung out, make fun of one of the other actors that we mutually don't like, and go home. Now this happened a few more times. I change, my clothes get moved around while I'm on stage for rehearsal, and we go to the bar, and it's like it never happened. One night I even watched them the entire rehearsal, even when I was on stage, to see if anyone snuck downstairs. But nothing. Yet my clothes were jacked up. So after that night we were all sitting there, and I finally break and call them out. I tell them that I'm impressed, because I watched them all night, so how did they do it? No one left my sight, and is there a ringer they have using the side door outside? They look genuinely baffled at me. "Huh?" my professor says. "What on earth are you talking about?" his buddy inquired. "My clothes are thrown all over the dressing room each night, and I know it's you guys, or someone else is in on it to haze the new guy." They looked at each other and asked me again what's been going on. So I explain it again, that they are messing with me, and they both get a look on their face of disbelief and somehow look giddy. "You mean to tell me she has a crush on you?" they asked. I tell them I'm not buying it, and they can cut the crap, but they both swear it wasn't them, and then ask me if there's been anything else going on, to which I tell them no. The buddy is totally gleeful, because he had only ever heard the rumours, but never actually been around for it. At this junction I'm not sure what to believe, but they swear up and down that it's not them, and on top of that, they hadn't told anyone else that they had told me about the ghost girl. After that the clothes horseplay kind of faded. It was still happening, just not as much, because everyone had begun dress rehearsal, so more people were in the basement. After a while I became used to it. Prank or not, I'd just collect my clothes, ask her nicely to please not throw my pants on the ground, and get dressed when it would happen. No harm, no foul. But then, it was opening night of the play. I got there quite early because of my nerves, and we were instructed to enter from the side door. Just my luck that the side door, which led directly into the dressing room area in the basement, was locked, which I found peculiar, because I could see a light coming from the bottom of the door, which meant someone, likely the assistant director, was there. I assumed she had just forgotten to unlock that door, so I went to the front and came in through the main doors, but it was pitch black as I walked into the foyer. Looking into the stage and the audience seating, I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face, it was so dark, minus a slither of light that I could see peeking out from behind the curtains. It was the light in the basement no less, so I made my way down an aisle, all the while calling out to anyone that might have been there. You know, like a dumbass about to be murdered in a horror movie. I finally felt my way to the stage and was getting closer to the light coming from the bottom of the steps to the basement, and that's when I heard it. Deep into the basement I could hear weeping. It was faint, but it was there. I assumed it was maybe the assistant director. Maybe she'd gotten into a fight with her husband or something. I slowly crept down the steps while calling out for her and asking if she was okay. When I got downstairs there was no one there, but still the crying was apparent. Now beyond the dressing rooms is a large dark room that only a small curtain separates me from a labyrinth of props and set pieces. I identified that that is where the source of the crying was coming from, and as I peeked my head through the curtain, the crying became deafening. I asked if whoever it was were okay, and I heard a sob and a loud "No." I informed whoever it was that I'm sure it'll be okay, and if they want to talk before the others showed up, then we can sit down and talk. "I'd like that," the voice said, and I could hear steps and crying coming my way, but I couldn't really see anyone. Yet as the steps and weeping were getting closer, making their way through the maze, in a moment I began to see a haze of a shape coming into focus from the darkness. I then began hearing loud banging on the front door upstairs, as if someone were trying to get in. This made me jump out of my skin, and I turned to look behind me. When I did this, the crying had stopped, and it was incredibly still and silent. You could hear a pin drop in the whole building. Totally creeped out, I made my way back up the stairs, far more swiftly than when I went down, and made my way through the pitch black. Only this time I'd noticed a light up in the tech room, which was once the projector room, but no one was there. I felt like I could see a shadow, but maybe it was my eyes playing tricks on me. I made my way to the box office area where the front doors are, where I had moments earlier heard them rattle violently, and standing outside the doors was my professor. He had a shocked look on his face, as if confused why he was seeing me. He slowly pointed at the front door, so I opened it and he came in. "How are you in here?" he asked. "What do you mean?" I said. "I mean, how'd you get inside?" "I came in through the door." "Which one? They're all locked. No one's here with the keys yet." "I came in through this front door," I explained. "But it was locked. I just tried it a few minutes ago. The side door is locked too, but I could see a light on, so I figured someone was here," he said. I then told him everything that had just happened, and his face went pale in disbelief. We went back to the stage area as I was explaining my story, and that's when I noticed that the tech room light was now off. And he also pointed out that there was no light coming from the basement anymore too. I told him I didn't dare touch any light switches, so we decided to sit outside and wait for others, since we were both freaked out. As soon as we stepped outside, we heard a click on the front door and checked. It had been locked again. Then a palm print appeared on the glass, then disappeared. After that, there were no more storage encounters or happenings during the 2-week run of the play. I'm from Australia, and this happened when I was 12 years old and in year 8 of school. A friend and I played after-school hockey. It wasn't a popular sport, so our games took place at another school, which was incredibly far away and pretty much in the middle of nowhere. The area didn't have any train stations, so we relied on 3 different buses to get there, and again to get home. The games usually took place pretty late, and ended around 7 or 8 p.m, when it was already dark. All the other girls in our team got picked up by their parents, but we also bussed it together home. We didn't feel it was dangerous, because there were 2 of us, and being classic 12-year-olds, we thought we were mature enough to be independent. Now, because we had to change buses 3 times, and we had lived so far away, by the time we'd gotten to our second bus stop, it was usually pitch black. The second bus stop was desolate, far out from the school, and in front of some kind of abandoned building, so ultimately a bit creepy. The stop was small and wasn't sheltered. It was just a steel pole with a bus painted on the sign. On this particular night it was raining as well, so we felt extra miserable standing out in the cold. Australian buses are also notoriously unreliable, so it wasn't unusual for us to wait an hour at this bus stop. That night though, it definitely felt like we had been waiting there for over an hour, when a car pulled up in front of us. A woman was inside, and she rolled down her window and asked where we were going. I told her the suburb we lived in, which was an hour's drive away, and she said she could give us a lift if we wanted. If it had been a man, I would have immediately been suspicious and legged it, but because she was a youngish woman who looked about 40, it didn't raise any red flags in my mind. I remember thinking that she must be understandably worried about 2 young girls standing out in the rain at night, so I smiled and thanked her, but said it was okay, as we would wait for the bus. She hesitated and then drove away. Around a few minutes later she came back and pulled up in front of us again. She told us that her daughter was performing in a play nearby and that she was going there anyway to pick her up, so are we sure that we didn't want a lift? My friend was almost about to get in, I guess because she wanted to get out of the rain, but I hesitated. Thank goodness for my parents drilling me about stranger danger. And I said thank you, but we'd wait. She was a bit pushier this time, and asked us if we were sure, quite a few times, and mentioned her daughter again. But she eventually drove away. At this point I think my intuition was telling me that it felt a bit weird that she hadn't mentioned her daughter in the first place. Another few minutes later she came back again. This time she said that she had just driven past our bus, further down the road, and that it had obviously skipped our stop, so she offered to give us a lift to try to catch up to it. Now I wouldn't put it past Australian buses to skip small stops, but it also sounded unlikely to me. By this point I was super suspicious. I didn't really have time to think, so it was a bad gut feeling rather than any logical reasoning. In hindsight, I question how she knew which bus number we wanted to catch, and also how she knew the bus route so well that she could follow it and try to catch up to it. With all politeness and smiles gone, I straight up said no. I could tell my friend, who was about to get into her car before, was also starting to feel the heebie-jeebies, because she backed away from the road. The woman hesitated for a while, which lapsed into an awkward silence, and I remember she kept glancing at her back seat. I remember holding my hockey stick tight and playing in my brain how I was going to defend myself. It honestly felt like forever before she finally drove away. In hindsight, I'm also glad that Australian cars drive on the right side, i.e. the driver's side door is on the far side, so that she couldn't just quickly open her door and grab one of us. A few minutes later the bus came, and I had never been so relieved in my life. By this point we were absolutely soaked. To this day I still don't know whether she was just a worried Good Samaritan or a potential kidnapper. I flip between the two and I honestly can't decide. My friend also thinks it's a mystery, and we don't know if we were just being paranoid. Now Halloween is a big deal in my town. Every house goes all out in a competition to see who can freak out the most kids. Luckily for us, they also compete to see who can give out the best candy. It's pretty great. And this year, my friends and I were finally old enough to go trick-or-treating alone. I spent all day getting ready with my friends Ashley and Sherry. I was going as a vampire, Ashley as a witch, and Sherry was a werewolf. I was just putting on some fake blood around my mouth as a finishing touch, when Ashley gasped. "What's wrong?" I asked without taking my eyes away from the mirror. "It's snowing," she said. Remember when I said Halloween was a big deal in my town? Yeah. Well, snow on Halloween was an even bigger deal in my town. It only happened once in my lifetime, and that was 10 years ago when I was 2, so I don't remember it at all. But that didn't matter. Every year in the days leading up to Halloween, the grown-ups in town would drill it into our heads that snow on Halloween was a bad sign, and that if it did snow, we had to follow the rules. The rules were, if it snows on Halloween, every trick-or-treater wearing a mask will be asked to take it off before they can get candy. If you were wearing a mask, you must take it off before taking any candy. If someone refuses to take off their mask, do not offer them candy and do not speak to them. We didn't know the why behind the rules, but honestly, I didn't care. Sherry was the only one of us wearing a mask after all. "Sucks to be you, Sherry," I joked. "Hope that giant furball of a mask is easy to take on and off." "Yeah, Cher. Michaela and I will leave you behind if you aren't fast enough," Ashley said with a laugh. Very funny guys. The good news was that we were staying at Ashley's house for the night, and her mum wasn't much of a nagger, so I figured she'd give us a quick reminder of the rules as we went out the door, and that would be it. My mum, on the other hand, was definitely a nagger. I could sense her phone call before my cell phone even rang. "Yes, Mum," I said as soon as I answered, not letting her get a word in. "Sherry's the one wearing a mask and she knows to take it off before getting candy. We won't talk to anyone who doesn't take their mask off, blah blah blah. Love you and see you tomorrow." I hung up and giggled. Parents, am I right? After one last look at our costumes to make sure they were perfect, we tumbled out the front door and into the snowy neighborhood. Our plan was to start at the house next door and work our way around the neighborhood as the night got darker. The inner streets had some seriously creepy-looking houses, and we wanted to hit those when it was good and dark out for maximum creep factor. "Do you think Josh and the guys will be out?" as we headed up the walkway to the nearest house. She had an obvious crush on Josh, but swore up and down that she didn't. "No idea, Ash," I said as I rang the doorbell. "Trick or treat!" As the night went on, Sherry got pretty quick at ripping her mask off her head the second she was asked. I had to give it to her, because she put it back on every time. I know the mask completed the werewolf costume, but I probably would have just left it off after the 4th or 5th house. Just before 9 o'clock, we hit the last house in the neighborhood. They were known to give out 2 full-size candy bars at the end of the night, just to get rid of them. We ran past a group of kids who were just leaving and bounded up the steps. "Trick or treat!" "What great costumes! Go ahead and take 2 bars if you like," the woman at the door said. "But you 2 will have to take off your masks first." 2? I looked over at Sherry and saw another kid standing next to her. He was dressed as a scarecrow with a burlap sack over his head. The mouth was crookedly stitched on, and the eye holes were jaggedly cut. I shivered and looked away. Just some kid trying to get their last bit of candy like we were before the neighborhood shut off their porch lights and turned in for the night. I reached into the plastic pumpkin the woman was holding out and grabbed a Twix and a Milky Way. I looked over at Sherry, who was pulling off her mask. The scarecrow stood still next to her, his mask still on. Ashley grabbed her 2 bars and nudged Sherry. "Come on, Wolfie, let's go." Sherry grabbed her candy and turned to the scarecrow. "Hey kid, you gotta take your mask off if you want candy." "Sherry, you can't talk to him," I blurted out. "What?" She looked confused for a second before her mistake dawned on her. "Oh crap, the rules." Sherry had moved to town 3 years ago, so the rules weren't as ingrained in her as they were in Ashley and I. We looked at the woman at the door nervously, hoping she would tell us the rules were just some silly made-up thing to make Halloween seem more scary. Instead, a look of pure terror crossed her face, and she yanked the plastic pumpkin back to her chest. "Run," she whispered before slamming her door shut and clicking the lock. Ashley and I grabbed Sherry and pulled her down the steps. We couldn't help but scream, though we didn't know exactly why the woman was so afraid. As we rounded the corner of the sidewalk, I turned to look behind us. I let out a shriek when my eyes met the jagged, empty eye holes of the scarecrow's mask. He was right behind us. "Faster!" I yelled, pulling on my friend's hands as I sprinted down the sidewalk towards Ashley's house. If we could just make it inside, we'd be safe from whatever this thing chasing us was. Over the ragged gasps of our breath as we ran, I heard the sound of straw rubbing together as the scarecrow gained on us. Finally, I saw the illuminated front porch of Ashley's house. The three of us sprinted up the front steps, faster than we'd ever dreamed of running in gym class. Ashley reached for the doorknob and froze. It was locked. She fumbled for her key as Sherry and I pounded on the door for her mum to open up. I could hear the rustling sound of the scarecrow getting louder, and just when I thought my heart would beat straight out of my chest, Ashley swung the door open and pulled us inside. She slammed the door shut and locked it before turning the porch light off. As we collapsed on the floor, gasping for air, my eyes turned to the side table by the door. On it was a piece of notebook paper. I picked it up and read it quickly before crumpling it up. "Your mom got called out in an emergency shift at the hospital, Ash. We're alone." Before Ashley could respond, there was a loud bang on the front door. The scarecrow was here, and it was mad. "We have to barricade the door," I said, standing up and grabbing the side table. Ashley got up and grabbed the other side of the table so we could move it up against the door, while Sherry dragged over a chair from the living room. Bang! Something hit the window above us as the front doorknob rattled at the same time. "Is there more than one of them?" Sherry asked. "No idea, but we need to get away from the door now," I said as I scrambled for the staircase. I figured being off the ground floor was safest. We ran into Ashley's room and started pushing her desk up against the door. I was pretty sure the scarecrow outside was no ordinary kid, and I didn't want to find out what would happen if it got to us. "Guys, I'm so sorry," Sherry said through choked sobs. "I didn't even think. I just thought it was some kid, and..." "It's okay, Cher," I said. "We're going to be okay." Bang! All three of us shrieked in unison as Ashley's bedroom window shook from the force of being hit. I turned to look and saw those jagged empty eye holes pressed up against the window. "How did it get up here?" Ashley screamed. "I don't know, but we need to hide," I said. "Follow me." I ran to the closet and ushered them inside, closing the door tight behind us. We huddled together behind Ashley's hanging clothes, our backs pressed as far up against the closet wall as we could. The angry banging on Ashley's window continued, and I braced myself for the sound of the window shattering from the force of the scarecrow's blows, but instead another bang sounded from the door to Ashley's bedroom. Next, another from the window, then the door, then the window. Sherry wept beside me, while Ashley rocked back and forth. I prayed to God that I wouldn't skip school again, and I'd do all my chores, and I'd never ever do anything bad again if he'd let us live. The assault on Ashley's window and door went on for hours. I swore I could hear the rustling of straw rubbing together from just outside the closet door. I was certain the door would open at any second, and the thing dressed as a scarecrow would drag us all down to hell with it. But finally, the banging stopped. We waited in silence for minutes, huddled together in fear. Silence. I pulled out my cell phone and checked the time. 12:05 a.m., November the 1st. We made it.